Okay, let's continue onwards. Next up, we have Richard Laurie, staying out west. And Richard's internal supervisor is Kuttner, and his external supervisor is Paul Schuetz, Vice President and General Manager of Forestry Operations, Industrial Forestry Service Limited. Over to you, Richard.
All right. Hi there. I'm Richard. This is my capstone on mid-rotation thinning strategies in lodgepole pine under varying stand density conditions. It's a TASS simulation study. It's a little bit on lodgepole pine. It's one of BC's most abundant trees. It has little taper and thin bark, which allows it to contain higher volumes than other tree species at similar sizes. It's a pioneer species. It often regenerates in high densities, typically after fire. So this also results in after clear cutting, high densities will regenerate. These large density, high density regen typically affects growth, mortality, and productivity as it increases competition and ultimately can lead to stagnation in the blocks. How we manage for that typically is between pre-commercial thinning and commercial thinning. Pre-commercial thinning is typically done between age 10 and 20, and it cuts small stems and leaves them on the forest floor. It does not harvest, whereas commercial thinning, which is what I'm mainly looking at, removes volume and it reduces competition this way. So given that, my study purpose is to evaluate how initial stand densities and commercial thinning intensities influence mid-rotation stand development in lodgepole pine. Essentially, I want to take a range of different densities. So 3 densities at an overstocked, a moderate, and a sparsely stocked. And I want to test different thinning intensities on these stands. And this will provide management direction for these sampled blocks in terms of thinning and what they should do. Move on to my methods. The study area against Prince George Natural Resource District. Mainly, this was in the Carp region. It's a subboreal spruce zone. These blocks in particular were pine-dominated forest, and they're around 40 years old. The age was concluded through aerial imagery using Google Earth to determine last harvest date, as well as timber cruising data, which also provide me with species composition, average tree height, DBH, basal area, and total volume. And I use these metrics to plug into BC government's tree and silviculture system. It's a modeling software that allowed me to project and look at growth and volume and mortality metrics throughout the planning period. So again, my stand structure, it was around age 40. The blocks I used were an overstocked at around 1,600 stems per hectare, a moderately stocked at 1,200 stems per hectare, and a sparsely stocked at 850 stems per hectare. It was lodgepole pine dominated, above 90% composition in all the blocks. Treatments, so thinning treatments are typically done based off basal area percentage removed. I used 4 treatments for this, an unthinned controlled one, a light thinned at 18% basal area removed, moderate at 25%, and heavy at 35%. Again, I used this and threw it into a TASS 3 model, and I mainly focused on 3 ages. It projected for the entire from 40 to 80, but I focused on the initial at age 40, post-treatment at 41, and the final harvesting volume at age 80. It produced metrics such as stems per hectare, average DBH, total mortality, and volume thinned versus total volume. How I concluded what blocks to use, I ran a resistance correlation on DBH and density and determined that there's a strong negative correlation between stand density and size of trees. So I wanted to get a broad range of this. I wanted to understand what these thinning effects will be on a sparse block, overstock block, and a moderately stocked block at different size classes as well. Go into the results. For changes in stems per hectare, you'll notice that from 40 to 41, there's an initial drop in all the thinning standards. This is due to the removal of volume from the forest. One thing to note is in the block one, you'll see the unthinned also drops as well. This is unexpected, but this is how the TASS modeling software influences it gets influences by such a high stocking standard. It determines the block is unfeasible, and it states that there's going to be a lot of natural self-thinning and a lot of mortality. So it models this in the first year. Realistically, this would happen over multiple years. It was happening up until this sample year, but also will continue to happen. When we look at block 6, we see a more steady decline in the unthinned section. This suggests that the block is still over its carrying capacity, but it is more stable than block 1. When we look at block 8, it's straight line. It is way under, it's sparse. It can maintain the density it's at and without reduction in stems per hectare. When we look at changes in DBH, we see a strong response to this thinning method. As shown earlier, my Pearson's correlation, there is a strong correlation between density and size. We see that again here in every model where the heaviest thinning has the highest DBH. We see the most growth in heavier thin blocks. When we look at the cause of stems per hectare change, looking at block 1, stands out. This is the block that had the most thinning. This is where all the mortality is from. In the unthinned block, we see that the entire loss in stems per hectare is due to mortality. This is because the block is overstocked and large scale self-thinning happens. We see as thinning treatments increase, we reduce that mortality. So in doing so, by increasing thinning percentages, we can reduce mortality. When we look at block 6, it is at a lower initial stem density. However, we still have some mortality in the unthinned section. This one, however, is a little different because this mortality occurred later in the planting period. We can notice that there's a little bit of initial drop, but most of the mortality starts to dip at around 60, 65 years. It's the top orange one up there. And this suggests that although a thinning wouldn't be necessary right away, later thinning around 60, 65 years would be beneficial to reduce that mortality and actually capture that volume that otherwise would have been lost. Going back, our block 8, very little, no mortality. Again, it's sparse. It can operate at this level. It doesn't need to be thinned. When we look at total volume, we're looking at the combination of the initial harvest and the final standing volume. In the block 1, we see in every single case that thinning increases our volume harvested. It's up to a 10% increase in the light block. Even in the light block too, by thinning, we're able to capture that volume that otherwise would have been lost in the unthinned block due to mortality. But we also can maintain the highest volume of final standing volume. In the block 6 moderate block, we see a slight reduction of around 4% in the light block. But the unthinned block is still operating at around its carrying capacity and still produces the highest volume. Again, the sparse block thinning treatments, it comes at the cost of too many stems per hectare loss, and we lose too much volume from it. So the unthinned block maintains the highest amount of volume. So our key takeaways, density drives mortality. So the higher the density, the more mortality we're seeing. We can avoid this by thinning. If we thin before we start to lose stems, we can capture that volume and reduce the mortality. High density also limits DBH growth. We see that with a reduction in density, we have larger trees. And again, thinning can avoid both these outcomes. When we look at optimal thinning treatments, it varies by blocks. As you can see, in block 1, thinning management will differ from block 8, a sparse block. Going into those specifically, when we look at block 1, it had high mortality, also showed the increase in DBH and volume with thinning. So a light thinning would be recommended. It maintains the same amount of total standing volume, but also captures that volume that would have otherwise been lost due to self-thinning. We look at moderate block. There was little mortality. There was still some, but most of that occurred later in the planting period. It occurred around 60 to 65 years. So a delayed thinning would be recommended. A light but delayed thinning would most likely be recommended for that block. Block 8, little mortality. Thinning reduces the volume too much. It reduces the stems per hectare, and thus no thinning should be done in such a sparsely stocked block. Now, looking at some of the limitations, again, the TASS model, there's some limitations with mortality showing in block 1, where it all accumulated in 1 year. This adds some degree of variation in my modeling. I didn't account for natural disturbances. Lodgepole pine is largely disturbed by fire and pine beetle, and I didn't really account for these stochastic disturbances. Thinning intensities as well is another limitation. In order to actually grasp what would be the best treatment for every block, you'd have to do a range of simulations on this, because as you can see, just between 18% and 25%, there was a huge difference in volume and DBH growth. To actually capture what would be best for the block, you need to model a broader range of thinning treatments as well. And then the last limitation would be historic differences. So changes in silviculture treatment, site index, disturbance patterns, as well as other biological difference play heavily into these blocks and would affect modeling. But anyways, thank you. I would like to acknowledge Ben. Thank you for being my supervisor, as well as the team at IFS and Paul Schuetz, Andrew Potter, and Nathan Atkinson, and then all you guys. Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Paul Schuetz, are you there? Are you able to, you have a question?
Yeah, you bet. So I guess, first of all, I'd like to thank Richard for a very good presentation. Yeah, it was very interesting, very concise. So what was your planned product at rotation? Like, what is the kind of the end goal?
It was to maximize volume harvest. So between the thinning as well as total standing volume, it would be to maximize that in each of the blocks. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, just looking at our notes here. So harvest for what like minimum DBH?
The minimum DBH at harvest, I think for lodgepole pine was at 7. Oh, no, it was at 15 point something. I think for lodgepole pine, that was the minimum DBH. I think
that's 7.
Yeah, centimeters. There is a method to putting in TASS 3 where I could model for a harvesting model, but with the free version of TASS, my computer kept crashing when I tried to do that, so it wouldn't model properly. So I don't know the exact volume that would have been produced through what the thinning model would look like, but that was just my best judgment given the data I could produce.
Okay, great, thanks.
Right, so I'll pass the mic to Ben.
Thank you, Richard. Great presentation. So I guess our first question is, changes a lot basically based on what this is in house.
Yep.
But how similar with the philosophy do you have to do that?
Yeah, so that's honestly where most of my stats came into play. Hold on, there we go. So these were the variation between species. I ran I did tested the variation between them. You can see there's high variation between blocks for most of the metrics between all the species, whereas lodgepole pine down here is the most consistent. I also ran a Shannon index of diversity and determined from both those that these were pretty much monoculture blocks. I also ran an ANOVA on interblock differences, just so I could treat them as separate blocks and not as the same block. You'll notice the most significant ones are stems per hectare and average DBH. And then net merchantable was around just below 10, with possible merging differences later, which we did see when I modeled it out, that the volume actually drastically widened as the stand grew up. So I determined to model it as a lodgepole pine monoculture as well as a separate blocks. Yeah.
I guess a follow-on question, what do you think could have led to, loss of the same age having such variable stopping?
So yeah, that depends on initial stocking as well as disturbance patterns and site prep patterns. I couldn't get access to the silviculture database, so I couldn't actually get what was the initial planting or any site prep or any management on that. But further natural disturbances, the stochasticity of it, you'll notice like some blocks have poplar in it, whereas other blocks have no poplar whatsoever. This indicates that disturbance had happened and natural regen occurred of poplar. The same can be said for other species like balsam. So that kind of it's the stochasticity of disturbances that can influence why the block changes so much.
More questions, Richard? Sean?
Could you tell us a little bit about how TASS works, what it's doing, and why it might be giving you different kinds of answers that you get from conservation diagrams or
Yes, from my understanding, TASS uses a canopy level index where it determines light availability to the trees and determines and models it based off that rather than the standard I'll listen for the model that's used in yield tables. I forget what it's called, but yeah, so it determines it based off light availability and canopy closure. So that's why you see different metrics as opposed to a different modeling software.
And that's good, excellent, good. And has it been successful? I mean, I know it is a good way see?
Yep.
And that it's giving a good match empirical sort of mechanistic or semi-mechanistic models oftentimes do or
yeah.
predictions. So we do the model calibration steps of
so like whether are we actually seeing
means that people believe what getting out of this model is that
yes, so based on my prior research, a lot of the research on natural thinnings was using these models as TASS model. In BC, it's a little tricky because we're coming up on the age now where we're seeing the management outcomes of our silviculture results back in the 80s and 90s. So I wasn't coming across many results that dictate that like end results showing the same thing as what these are. I think it's more about like we need more data and we need to kind of wait to see the results. Like it's too early to tell. We don't have that data on blocks. Thinning, like commercial thinning didn't occur prior to like the mid 70s, 80s. So
Further questions for Richard? Ben?
So, we did discuss this, but it wasn't part of your presentation. The TASS model was actually far more complex than the version we were using that to do access and so forth, right? But one of the things that adds to that complexity is multiple species to be considered.
Yep.
Given the input data and the outcomes. So my question to you would be, I mean, we saw pretty much exactly what we would expect in terms of the results of your simulations. Do you think that you will see the same patterns with the additional complexity of your subdominant species?
Yeah, I do in the sense that a lot of the competing species, it would differ for sure, but a lot of the competing species such as balsam and spruce, lodgepole pine can in my research can outcompete them. The only thing would be poplar region. So it definitely would differ, and it would add to the variation in both volume and DVH, because they're different species. They contain different volume and will grow at different rates as well. So
Good thing.
We have John.
Then this said something about.
sorry, can you hold it up for that? Sorry.
Then he said something about how the results were more or less as expected. And I was kind of expecting, since it had three densities, and three intensities of thinning, that there would be sort of a match up where you had particularly the thinning intensities, hoping that you have light for the sparse stand, medium for the median stand, and then edging for the other stock stand. But in fact, it was going to light
Yeah.
the other stock. Was that what you expected, or?
Yeah, actually, yeah. So initially when I modeled it, I did it based off prior research on basal area removal in terms of commercial thinning, and it was done based off of a range from below 20 is light, pretty much the range I showed, above 35 is heavy. And I was actually expecting in a dense block such as the overstocked one that moderate or heavy thinning would be required. But in terms of it actually just reduces too much volume. That being said, if we do go back to it, we still, in every thinning scenario, there's still more volume being harvested. But it's just the fact that the light thinning what's it called? It removes the least amount of stems. So there's more total volume standing. Yeah, but that was a surprise to me that it wasn't as clear, and also that block 6 didn't even show any kind of improvement due to the thinning.
Okay. More questions for Richard. Thank you, Richard.
Awesome.